Good morning to one and all. In this series of snippets titled Aurobindo on Poets and Poetry, the fourth literary personality of study is William Shakespeare. Let us try to understand his poetic genius and the source of inspiration in the light of Aurobindo. According to Aurobindo, if the essential law of poetry is to capture the spirit, then the question arises, does William Shakespeare manage to capture the spirit in English literature in the 16th century Britain? Of Shakespeare, Aurobindo observes, I quote, "The great magician Shakespeare, by his marvellous poetic rendering of life and the spell his poetry casts upon us, conceals this general inadequacy of the work of his time. The whole age which he embodies is magnified by his presence, and the adjacent paler figures catch something of the light and kinship of his glory, and appear in it more splendid than they are. But Shakespeare is an exception, a genius that transcends all laws, a miracle of poetic force. He survives untouched all adverse criticism, not because there are not plenty of fairly large spots in the sun, but because in any complete view of him, they disappear in the greatness of his lustre. I unquote. This is high praise indeed, and it clarifies the reason why Aurobindo places him in the select top row while choosing and commenting on some of the greatest poets in the West and the East. In fact, K.D. Setna recalls in his work Aurobindo on Shakespeare that other than his own poems, Aurobindo had only Shakespeare's poems in his room. It is small wonder that Aurobindo included a chapter titled Shakespeare and the Poetry of the Life Spirit to the great magician in the future poetry. Contributing the maximum life spirit to the golden age of English literature, Shakespeare is a versifier of life because he provided humanity with a rich vision of life, its workings and modes of expressions via feelings and emotions. Aurobindo elaborates, I quote, "It is this sheer creative ananda of the life spirit which is Shakespeare. Abroad everywhere in that age, it incarnates in him for the pleasure of poetic self-vision." I unquote. One of the genres via which Shakespeare manifests the sheer ananda of the life spirit is the sonnet. In his hands, it breathes new life. Shakespeare breaks the typical sonnet form known as the Petrarchan sonnet that pens down the poet's unattainable love for a woman. Shakespeare instead uses this sonnet uh, to express his attainable love to a lady, to express his friendship to a man, to compose parodies of the typical sonnet, to make observations on political events of his time, to compare the inner or real beauty versus the outer or cliched beauty of women and men in the English society of the 16th century, and to explicitly voice sexual desires. These are some of the topics or themes he deals with in his sonnet. A hilarious example of the inner or real beauty versus the outer or cliched beauty is a poem on the dark lady who is described to have wiry hair, black hair, and dark brown skin. Shakespeare breaks the norm by appreciating dark women who have inner beauty, as opposed to appreciating only fair women with alabaster skin and golden hair. Therefore, Shakespeare revolutionizes the sonnet by making it a fit medium to appreciate all human life, what moves, inspires, and excites it. Aurobindo says, I quote, Shakespeare is not primarily an artist, a poetic thinker, or anything else of the kind, but a great vital creator and intensely, though within marked limits, a seer of life. I unquote. So the Shakespearean sonnet exemplifies the life force inspiration. Aurobindo opines that the high art of Shakespearean poetry abounds not only in life spirit but also in method and quality. The Shakespearean method and quality is exemplified by the Shakespearean language, which according to Aurobindo is a unique and wonderful thing. William Shakespeare has contributed numerous new words and phrases to English language, thereby playing a major role in revolutionizing it. Aurobindo says that the Shakespearean language is or observes a decorative image style. But his images are, I quote, are more immediately revelatory, intimate to the thing he speaks, rather the proper stuff of the fact itself than images. I unquote. An example of this decorative image style is the Shakespearean conceit or metaphor that reveals a thought and a truth by drawing comparison between two unlikely objects or situations. The comparison is often extravagant because of the apparent unlikeliness of the objects which are being compared, but it offers a deeper perspective of life. So Aurobindo states, I quote, Shakespeare was the poet of life seen through an identity of feeling in it and of thought arising out of the surge of life. I unquote. In the evolution of the poetry, the life spirit takes its earliest steps as a portrayal of external life in the works of Geoffrey Chaucer as noted by Aurobindo. It evolves in the hands of Edmund Spenser, who portrays a more beautiful and harmonious life scene that is ethical with the undertone of the symbolic. In Christopher Marlowe's works, the life spirit reveals itself as the will egoistic and asuric, conquering, I quote, to succumb to the great adversary death or breaking itself against the forces its violence has brought into hostile play. I unquote. So in Marlowe's hands, the life spirit takes the self-destructive form of the rebel hero who is consumed by desires. The same life spirit reaches its zenith in Shakespeare, as observed by Aurobindo, who says that the Shakespearean inflatus is molded by a life vision that illustrates, I quote, both the inner and the outer worlds, I unquote. And these worlds are devoid of any religious undertone. So Shakespearean works do not have any religious undertone. In fact, Shakespeare was essentially a secular poet. To conclude, Aurobindo calls Shakespeare Hiranyagarbha, the luminous mind of genes, looking through those forms to see his own images behind them. More than any other poet, Shakespeare has accomplished mentally the legendary feat of the impetuous sage Vishwamitra. His power of vision has created a Shakespearean world of its own, and it is, in spite of its realistic elements, a romantic world in a very true sense of the word, a world of the wonder and free power of life and not of its mere external realities. I unquote. Thank you.